ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ticklish Business. Kristen and Emily back again, and we are doing our second of 3 episodes for International Month, our vacation, yay, through the landscape of international classic film. And we started in Germany in 1929 with Pandora's Box, and we are moving to 1966 and Algeria with the Italian-Algerian film, The Battle of Algiers. And we picked a great week to talk about it at the time we're recording this. Perfect timing. But before we start to talk about that, we'd like to briefly remind everyone that if you haven't checked out our Patreon at patreon.com/ticklishbiz, you should. We do all sorts of bonus podcasts, including doubled features looking at remakes, based on a true podcast looking at biopics and true crime, as well as But Have You Read the series. We have a bunch of stuff coming soon in the next couple of days, a lot of interviews actually, as well as our Dawn Johnson in July series, which we are going to be kicking off with the 1985 TV miniseries, The Long Hot Summer. You could also listen to our latest doubled features episode we did on Death Takes a Holiday and Meet Joe Black, possibly the worst movie that we have ever discussed, worst remake, at least. We also have our upcoming video interviews with Thelma Schoonmaker and David Hinton, who directed the film Made in England about Powell and Pressburger, talked to Laurent Bozeroux, who did the Faye Dunaway documentary. So we have a lot of stuff going out on Patreon. So it starts at just $1. We also have stuff for our free members as well. So please consider helping us out. I also have that really big prize pack that I talked about, I think, a couple months ago and just forgot about. But we would still love to give that away to our 50th patron. So consider helping us get there. It's filled with all sorts of TSAM branded merch, books, bunch of other stuff. It's all patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And don't forget, I have a book, but have you read the book 52 Literary Gems that Inspired Our Favorite Movies? Emily has her entire Viviana Valentine series. We are also hard at work on multiple other books. You can order them wherever you purchase things, but we would love your support there. And our Redbubble store has some fabulous art, all designed by Samantha Ellis and Terrence Hills, featuring your favorite stars, including our popular Makoko mugs and our Basil Rathbone, I've Been Rathbone stickers. A lot of really fun stuff there. That's at ticklishbiz.redbubble.com. And last but certainly not least, you can always listen to our entire archive of episodes, always going back to episode 1, which is free at ticklishbusiness.podbean.com. Battle of Algiers, yay! This is a Italian-Algerian neo-realist film directed by, I'm assuming it's pronounced Gilo, but somebody can tell me if it's a hard G or not, Pontecorvo, about the Algerian War that took place between 1954 and 1962 against the French government in North Africa, and the Battle of Algiers for the capital of Algeria. There's really no plot beyond that. It's just about the various freedom fighters as well as government officials that are involved in this. Shot very Roberto Rossellini, newsreel, documentary, cinema verite style. This was Emily's choice. And I'm not saying that as like, this is Emily's fault, because Pandora's Box was my choice. So we're going through it this year, guys. But I mean, I'm curious, when I said we were going to do International Month, you said right off the bat, not even thinking about it, that you wanted to do Battle of Algiers. Emily Edwards, explain why.
I have seen this movie so many times. First of all, I studied post-colonial studies when I was in college, and my professor, who was my main professor, his name is Nigel Gibson. He is a leading French finance scholar amongst people who talk about post-colonial studies and all of that, just drip in as many resume points in here as I can. He showed this to us quite frequently, where he was just sort of said, if you want to immerse yourself in the understanding of what post-colonialism is, how people overthrew colonialist governments, colonizers, and a lot of the politics of it, you don't do much better than the Battle of Algiers. And frankly, it is an incredibly moving and important movie to me. And it has only grown in importance to my life and my understanding of the world as time has gone on and I have gotten much older. I found myself really watching it this go around, really just gripped and moved by all of these people. Many of the actors that are in this were actual revolutionaries and people who helped to overthrow the government, the French government at the time. And for me, it was just really interesting to see people who were not that far removed from the war that they just fought really bring it to the screen with the help of an incredibly emotionally driven Italian filmmaker who was Jewish and was run out of Italy by the Nazis, and having a deeper understanding of the politics that surrounded this movie has led me to a greater appreciation for this movie. And I really appreciate the fact that, and I know I mentioned this to you as well, and now I'm just rambling, but when we watched Elevator to the Gallows for last year's International Month, there's actually quite a bit that reminded me of the Battle of Algiers. And so this is almost a lovely little callback to our episode last year as well.
I had never seen this. It's on a lot of like 101 movies you should see, best movies ever made. So I needed to at a certain point, and I tend to be very specific when I look at international films because international cinema is often like level 2 in your classic film discourse. And for a lot of people like me, we stick to what we know, which is, for me, frothy comedies or fun period pieces, or unless Kurosawa, you look at maybe some more war-oriented or more political things because that's just how it's couched. But Italy and me, the neo-realist movement, it hasn't really gotten to me yet in the same way that I'd like other international cinema to grip me. So I was very afraid of how I was going to take this. Emily and I both made a conscious decision. We're going to try very, very hard to not try to talk politics of today in talking about this movie. But it was very difficult to watch this considering where we all are politically, especially with what's going on in the Middle East right now and Gaza. To watch it was very fascinating because I'm always talking about how movies have to wait a certain period of time, right, before they're considered palatable for an audience to watch. We didn't get Vietnam movies until I think like 2 decades after the Vietnam War had ended. Not at least anything with any real like objective, let's talk about the highs and lows and critique that sort of thing. And it's amazing to me that this was made 4 years after the war had ended. Just 4, not 5, 4. It's utterly beautifully, it's beautiful to watch. And I don't say that, like I said, with Meet Joe Black, where it was just like, it's beautifully shot. That's the one saving grace. But it's the one thing that, you watch any of the neo-realist movement and the cinematography is just always very in your face, very much like you're watching a documentary at the time. And it's so uncompromising about what it's talking about. But I think more importantly, too, is that it does have this objectivity to it. Because you're not really given a lot of depth into the characters, and because a lot of the characters are composites of the numerous people that were involved, you're forced to really, A, make up your own mind about where you land on things, and B, if you're an American like me watching this in 2024, you're plopped into the middle of things and the director's just like, you figure it out. You figure out what the history is, what has led to this. You figure out which side you're on. You figure out whether these characters are good or bad. There's a little bit of context about how, the government wants to cast people out. There's a lot of discourse between the Muslims and non-Muslims at the time. And that's really it. That's really all you're getting, unless you're going to go through the huge, lengthy IMDb Wikipedia page on the Battle of Algeria and the war at the time. And I really appreciated that. It's just documenting, and that's really what it is. It's a fictionalized documentary of this is what happened. We're going to put you on the ground, follow these characters, And at the end of the movie, you figure out whether it was worth it or not, which is really interesting because it makes you ask the question of who is the audience for it now. Because at the time, yes, there clearly was going to be an audience for it, but all these years, decades later, who is watching it now? And I would say that as long as war exists, there will always be a reason for this movie to exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You just summed that up so wonderfully, because one of the things that I do genuinely respect about this is that Pontecorvo was he was very politically active. He had his own feelings about the expansion of Europe and who was in power and things along those lines. But the movie itself does try to be very objective about things that actually happened. There is a slant. There's no way you can say this is an apolitical movie. And I certainly do think that the movie errs on the side of being with the revolutionaries. However, it does not shy away from the very real reasons and very real politics that France had for maintaining their colonies in North Africa. They do not shy away from the blood and the extreme violence that's being put against people who are not in the military, against civilians, against women and children. They are extremely brash and bold and do not shy away from the fact that bombs are being set off in cafes, airline lounges, and things along those lines actually did happen. And it's good to remember while you're watching these things that, again, these were all things that were pulled from actual events and actual headlines and actual deaths. Obviously, I'm a fiction writer. I write stories that do not happen. And there's always an incredible power in extrapolating real world politics and real world feelings and grievances to a fictional narrative. But I do think that it's harder to ignore reality. And Pontecorvo knows this as a Jewish Italian man who was run out of Italy and then had to go and live in France during World War II, that there is a specific power in bringing things that actually happened and real deaths and real people sort of like unmasked to the populace. And certainly I think we get a lot of that now in documentary format, whereas documentaries existed in the 1960s, but they weren't as, well, I'm just going to sit on down and turn on a Netflix documentary about these horrific, brutal murders that were committed in Iowa in whatever time, or, this kidnapping and this cult and things like that. That was not quite the same zeitgeist and consumption of information in the 1960s that we have now. And I do think that this was an excellent bridge for people and also filmmaking as a whole to connect fiction to nonfiction, real and unreal, manufactured feelings and genuine feelings. I just cannot say enough about how important this movie is to me and my understanding of narrative, but also how incredibly brutal it is to actually watch.
It really is just heartbreaking when it's presented on screen because it's so uncompromising. A sequence where a group of women are going to plant bombs and it's women, which, we talk about something like 8.5, which focuses very much on the ways that women are presented, whether that be as mother, wife, sex object. And this is, Italy was a country that was highly resistant to divorce for so long, very Roman Catholic. So to see a group of older women, some young women as well, wanting to go and act as quote unquote suicide bombers, that's got to be jarring. That had to be jarring in 1966 to see. But the fact that they go into, a diner and disco or whatever, the dance club, and the camera looks at men, women, children, all these people that are congregating, and the audience understands exactly what is going to happen, but to actually see the building explode, to see people climbing out of the rubble, again, to look at it through today's lens was extremely jarring because it is no different than modern day photojournalism that we've seen. But the fact that the movie is giving you a narrative where you are not learning about these characters, but it goes back to what you were saying about how filmmaking works. And what people don't realize is that when the camera is on somebody, there might not be a lot of characterization spoken about who that person is, but the audience understands that while the camera is on them, you are meant to identify with them. Because the camera is focused so much on these certain groups of people, you do feel like, okay, well, the movie wants me to see these characters as someone I should identify with. So you are taken along on this journey with these women as they pass through the checkpoints, and they're allowed to pass through the checkpoints because they are women.
Yes. And specifically, they dress up as Western women. And so the French checkpoint officers do not harass them as much as they do the women who are veiled, because it's a Muslim city at the time and still is. But there's women who are veiled that they don't stop because they don't understand the culture of veiled women or covered women, and what can they be touched, can they not be touched. And then in addition to that, the women who are the bombers, they dress in Western clothing. So two of them, I believe, actually remove their veils in a sequence of getting ready, and one of them bleaches her hair in order to appear more Western. And so these are ham-fisted almost images of Pontecorvo saying, like, this is what is happening. They trust Western. They do not trust non-Western. It's not subtle in any way, but it is incredibly important sometimes, I think, to be hit with the images as brazenly as he does.
Yeah, this is a movie that starts with the ending, pretty much. I mean, you have a group of people trapped behind this wall, and the police are on the other side. Very much a Bonnie and Clyde-esque type of ending before Bonnie and Clyde had actually come out. And then we flash back to the beginning. And when you meet our quote unquote lead, which is Ali Lapointe, played by Brahmin Hajjaj. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right.
I believe it's Hajjaj, but I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you for that. He's tripped by a white kid as he's running from the police. And that sets up the dynamic that you need to know, which is Ali is darker skinned, this kid is white, and that there is this dichotomy. And I think you need that ham-fistedness, because a Western audience watching this, like you and me, are not going to know the complex international politics of what is going on. I mean, I don't know how even well documented this was on news channels in the early 1960s here in the US.
I can't imagine very well. I imagine that most of this was much more meaningful to Europeans at the time. Pontecorvo being Italian, they had a lesser sort of colonial empire than every other nation. But this was a time where Europeans were losing all of their colonies across Africa and Asia. So I believe Britain had already lost Egypt, and France was losing quite a number of their colonies. Italy had already lost their footholds in the Horn of Africa. They had colonized Eritrea and Ethiopia and Somalia, and those were gone. And so there was a huge, massive, almost come to Jesus for most Europeans at the time of just saying, well, now what are we going to do now that we don't have these colonial powers anymore? So it was much more important to Europeans. Americans did their own colonization in various different repugnant ways. And but it wasn't as on our doorstep as it was for the Europeans. And of course, this is also coming off of the tail end of World War II. Germany is pulling out of places. Italy is pulling out of places. The Axis powers are moving out of places. Tumult across the board. And then for them to be forced to have empathy for colonized, not white people must have been just an absolute gut punch to the European way of viewing things.
Yeah. And I mean, the US was already mired in its own issues, too, as this is happening simultaneously. The Vietnam War starts in 1955. Korea, I think, was in there. Like
Korea was in the early
too.
50s.
Yeah. So, I mean, so internationally, I can only imagine how well documented the war for Algiers was to the US. And that's really what it's, in its ham-fistedness, quote unquote, it has to give audiences that context, because it's easier to say the issue is between Muslims and non-Muslims than it is to say, well, actually, there's all these, geopolitical things that go into it. So I appreciated that because it gives me, as a white American in 2024, some sort of easy access to be like, oh, okay, I know what this is going for. So I appreciated that.
They do a very good job of detailing in very few words the real issues of the ghettoization of Algerians into the Algerian quarter, while the French are allowed to walk around in the majority of the city. The checkpoints, the paperwork, the lack of food. There's a very long sequence, which again is very bizarre to an American, where the Algerians who are shoved into their own essentially gated section of Algeria declare that they're going to go on a strike, a generalized strike, in order for the French to realize just how much Algerians do to keep French Algeria running. And it was very funny to me as an American now to see the French get all up in arms and flustered over the idea of people who are French citizens. Algerians were citizens of France throwing a general strike because France is the most strike happy, we're going to march and not do anything for weeks on end country in the world. They love a good strike. It's built into the French culture. But for Pontecorvo to say the French don't like it when they're Muslim French citizens decide to do it, and now they have to sit with that feeling, it's an incredible, boring thing to put into a movie. But 50 years later, 60 years later, it was one of the things that had me contemplating the entire motives of the Algerian people more thoroughly, because there's been like 5 strikes in France this year.
Have you become a Ticklish Biz patron yet? Well, you should. Just like Allie Moore, Amy Hart, Danny, David Floyd, Donna Hill, Gates, Jacob Haller, Jonathan Watkins, Krista Painter, McF, Rachel Clark, and Shawn Goodreau. Listen to episodes 48 hours early, watch exclusive video interviews, receive merch, and even guests on an episode. You also get access to bonus series like Based on a True Podcast, double features, and our latest series, But Have You Read the Series? We're also giving away a massive prize pack to our 50th patron and doing a special theme in July that we've dubbed Don Johnson July. It all starts at $1 at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. Back to the show. Well, France had a very overt reaction to this movie when it came out. It won the Golden Lion at Venice, and it was nominated for 3 Academy Awards in non-consecutive years, which is bananas to think about a movie just coming back 3 different times. So it was nominated for Best Foreign Language in 1966, Best Screenplay and Best Director in 1968. 2 years later, France was not pleased with it at all. The movie was one of the first films to talk about French imperialism. All the other movies had maybe just been a bit more oblique. And when it premiered at Venice, the national press didn't want to see it. They didn't want to review it. And it was formally banned by the French government for a year. So it didn't actually, for various reasons, premiere in the country until I think the early 70s. And now the French consider it just this landmark film. They really appreciate it. But at the time, they were just like, no, which is not surprising. People don't like being confronted with their flaws, especially on a public stage. But even to that effect, because Pontecorvo and his co-writer are not giving you much background on anybody, the French government, they are just there. You don't really know much about them to really understand their motivations. It's something that I kept thinking of, comparing it to World War II films, because at least in America, World War II, very clear point of view, Nazis bad. And that's how it should be. But to watch this movie, I don't know, Emily, if I'm talking out of my hat here, but because there's no background to any of these things, it's not saying French government bad. It's more French government there. They're just present. You don't like them, of course, because they are the opposing side, because every movie needs to have an opposing side. But, the colonel who shows up, who is just the definition of a colonel with like blonde hair, super tall, icy demeanor, looks like somebody out of Top Gun. He's definitely an intimidating presence, and you understand their objective. But it's this weird way that the script kind of presents things, which is just like, they're just a force. That's, I think, what I'm going for. They are just a force. And you don't really know anything about them. You don't really know what the motivations are. It's just they are there to stop things, because every good protagonist needs an antagonist.
Yeah, the French colonel has a couple of really interesting speeches. And one of them towards the middle end of it, he says to journalists who are starting to come around to the Algerian side, he says, all of you, even from the communist newspapers, do you want a colony? Do you want to continue having the colony of Algeria? And everybody just kind of murmurs or like, a non-committal yes. And he just says, well, this is what it takes in order to maintain a colony, is we're going to have to kill uprisers. And he just says it point blank to a room full of journalists. And everybody is forced to sit with their own feelings about it. And I never really noticed that before in my younger and more overtly radical years. I never really noticed that scene before, because I'd never even bothered to listen to the French people the first time I watched this, where I was just like, oh, damn French. And, and I got really, really mad. But I never really listened to that scene before. But he is saying something that is incredibly important to government, of if you want to continue the status quo and not have citizens change anything, essentially, that is not a non-violent thing to say. Everything is moving. Everything is changing. Pontecorvo is very, very specific in pointing out that there is no such thing as just maintenance. You either regress or progress, and that's it. And so this movie is so bald-faced in explaining that colonialism and colonization is a different act than imperialism. Moving to a place and staying there is a different act of government, of violence, than many other aspects of government and violence. And this movie does not hold back at all. One of the main characters in this movie is a boy under 12 he does mischief, scampy things in order to...
He's the Gavroche of
Yes, he is
movie.
the Gavroche. Real person, real child who died in the Battle of Algiers, who is doing playful, silly, ridiculous things in order to antagonize the French, and then is allowed into adult machinations more and more and more as he proves himself. And at the end, spoiler alert, because he's real, he gets bombed and dies in an explosion set by this French colonel. And you have to sit with that. Pontecorvo does not let you ignore it. And it's stunning and beautiful and horrific all at once. I think,
too, what I notice is how often the language mimics a lot of American foreign policy at the time. Again, leading up to the Vietnam War, this would be I'm sure somebody who's programmed this. I do not think I've come up with this idea just for the first time ever, but this would be fantastic to play opposite something like Platoon, because so much of the policy that the French government is espousing at this time is similar to the domino theory that was utilized to justify Vietnam, which is the colonel, I think, says at one point, if you cut off the head of one, more just spring up, that they'll die for the cause. It's the segmentation of it. It's not about snuffing out one small group. It's about going to the head and ruining everything. And I mean, that's the same methodology that we've utilized in America for the Black Panthers and, just a lot of, it's not a unique thought process, but considering that Vietnam was starting at the same time as the Battle of Algiers, and to hear it being said, it's amazing how colonialist thinking, if there's one thing that unifies every country, it's that their thinking is the same thing. It is quite literally the same thing, which is you have to snuff out dissenters, but you can't snuff out just individual little cells. You have to go to the main group, which, Ali Lapointe is that main person, starts out as just like some dude that doesn't really want to get involved and then becomes this freedom fighter. And the actor who was supposedly just picked by Pontecorvo as he was walking down the street, pretty much was considered Ali Lapointe for the rest of his career. Huge star in Algeria, one of their biggest names, died far too young at the age of 62 of a brain tumor. But he's so fantastic and magnetic when you watch this. You can see the Italian neo-realist influences of the filming of him, because he's not presented in kind of godlike stature in any way, shape, or form. He's just, and oftentimes a lot of the pictures, which is funny, are him with groups of other people to emphasize that he is the leader, yes, but he is just one of a collective of people. And I think that's really interesting, again, to place it something alongside maybe like Spike Lee's Malcolm X, about these characters that are, he's frustrated, he gets angry, he's quick to temper, but at the same time, the strategizing and the way that he gets people involved, that opening scene, which also is the final scene of them trapped behind this faux bathroom wall, and he tells people, you can leave, you can go. And the fact that they want to stay, they are willing to stay with him because he has brought them all there. And it was also hard for me, and I don't know if Pontecorvo utilize this as a deliberate influence, but I would be very fascinated to find out. But the fact that they're hiding behind this bathroom wall, very small space, it was very reminiscent of Anne Frank to me. Totally. I got a lot of Anne Frank vibes, in the hiding of it, and the fact that they're all there as a group. I'd be very interested to know how inspired he was by American conceptions of like war heroism and World War II he was at the time.
It's difficult because that is a thing that actually happened.
Sure, yeah.
It's both factual, but like obviously the beginning scene and the ending scene, they bookend the entire film. And it starts with a scene of an Algerian man being tortured for information of where is Ali Lapointe. And he is in his underwear. He's very clearly been tortured. He's sobbing. He's very distraught. And the Frenchmen who are torturing him and have gotten the information, they tell him to get dressed, and they hand him fatigues, and they say to him, if you wear these when we go into the neighborhood in order to find where Ali is hanging out and hiding out, they'll all think you're one of us, is essentially what the line is. And the man starts sobbing because he realizes that now he is one of them. He has betrayed the Algerians. He has betrayed Ali. And he is so destroyed by his actions, but he shouldn't be. Obviously, he's been tortured, and the film is very compassionate towards him for the amount of pain that he's been put through and the torture that he's been put through. And I feel like that is obviously it's very much in line with our understanding of how people get sold out, how people are given up to authority, murderous authority, violent authority. It's really, really fantastic. And then I noticed a scene this time around while I was watching it. They're trying to find Ali. He's hiding out, and the French government is going through the streets, the Casbah, and it's windy, circuitous. It looks like the Aladdin village where everybody lives. It's like nothing but stairs and windy roads, and I don't know how you find your way around. And they're going through and they're breaking all the shop windows, very crystal knocked, very much we're looking for someone. We're breaking all the shop windows. We are destroying everything that is your livelihood. We're going to ruin it. And then immediately following, when they don't find Lapointe after they're looking for him, they hand out bread. And Pontecorvo, again, not subtle in any way, but I think it's such an interesting thing we were inundated with World War II movies. We knew American right and wrong, but most World War II movies are white people and white people. It's just, you can't tell by looking at people in World War II movies who's the Jewish character and who's the Nazi character. Usually the Nazis are blonde, but other than that, not a whole lot of visual difference. And Pontecorvo is so astute in making this film about people who are an obvious other. And I do think it is a wonderful precedent for Spike Lee's incredibly politically charged films and all the politically charged films that are going to be coming later in the 70s, starting in the 70s and later, to make incredibly political movies about an obvious visual other.
Definitely. And I think too what you're saying is that war is not original. It's not unique. The concepts that we're using in World War II are the same as we're using here, is the same as we were using in Vietnam, is same as we probably are today. You know, if anything, it shows the utility and the repetition of war. You can watch this movie and, like I did, connect it to what is going on now, as you probably could have 50 years ago, as you can 50 years from now. And I think that's really what is the true, I don't want to say genius because there's nothing positive about it, but I think that's the true message of Battle of Algiers, is that this can be applied to any war. Yes, it is specifically about this one, but it's no different than any war that has been faced or will be faced, which is, you know, I hate to say timeless, but it does make the movie timeless for its, you know, messages. So
yeah, I think we had a little bit of a joke back and forth about the fact that we are not choosing uppers this year, and it's you know, it's not like Elevator to the Gallows was a particularly like happy-go-lucky movie last year, but you know, I'll write a whole thing about it. I'll give it to Patreon about like the tendrils of colonialism that were actually in Elevator to the Gallows that are echoed here and things like that. It's really, really interesting if you go back and rewatch that. Pontecorvo's incredible dedication to the universalism in the specific, and it's goofy shorthand when you're writing, but I think it makes for the most impactful movies. And I just can't get over all the little things that are done in this in order to make it feel so timeless and frighteningly, scarily timeless. And if you're having a bummer summer like we are, like truly pick this up, watch it, mull it over. You know, one of the things that I really, really love about this, in addition to the fact that all the casting is visually, you know, you have the very, very white French people versus the very, very not white Northern Africans, is the use of African drumming in the score. Is whenever there is violence happening or revolutionary acts happening, Ennio Morricone co-wrote the score, and their dedication to North African drumming in this is beautiful. You will want to listen to it forever because it is an incredibly emotional score. And there's so much happening in this that is specific and targeted and thoughtful. And I can't get enough of this movie, but you really can't watch it that many times a year if you want to keep your sanity.
I do love how often, now that I've heard the Ennio Morricone score, how often other movies have utilized it in genres that are not war films. I think like This Is the End used it in a gag at one point, and I'm just like, I don't know how I feel about that. But I keep going back to one of the lines in the movie, I forget who exactly says it. You can tell me. To know them is to eliminate them. And I think that is such, you know, I understand why the script got nominated for Best Screenplay, because that is both a beautiful and terrifying line. I think that we still should be talking about today in any type of conflict where there is this sense of othering, but even when you know that person, that desire to want to remove them, even though they, you know, and I'm trying to speak kind of around our current discourse here in America, but it's such a well-written line, and it's haunting in how it plays against the backdrop of this movie.
It's so weird because that is the essence of colonialism in like 6 or 7 words of just you colonize a place, and your goal is to make the people that you colonize as much like the colonizing culture as possible. That is the essence of Black Skin, White Masks, the Frantz Fanon novel treatise that he wrote. And I did an episode on a very famous Indian novel called The Guide for my book podcast many, many years ago. And I spoke to a woman in India. Her name is Amrita, and she made a wonderful sort of offhanded joke about British colonialization in India. And she said they moved to India and they wanted to make millions of little brown Englishmen. And then they got mad at us for trying to be English. And that is the essence of colonialism, in a nutshell, of just the French go to Algeria. They want to make Algeria French, and then they're furious that the Algerians want to be treated like they're French. And that is just like the perfect summation of this film and the conflict and the overthrow and everything. It's a beautiful line to be included in the film.
It makes me think, to boil it down to something people know today, it makes me think of Hamilton. It makes me think of the, You'll Be Back, the song, which plays is very much emphasizing the toxic relationship that is England and the US. But at the same time, you're totally right, which is that colonialism hinges on the fact of, we own you, you should love us. Ownership and love. And that those two things need to coexist. Ownership and loyalty. Ownership and respect. And I think that is something that is so fascinating to really deconstruct. Even just the use of the wording and the line, is that to know them is to eliminate all of the things that make them who they are. And eliminate a culture, eliminate a way of life. But at the same time, to kill them in some literal cases. And it is this level of, I know you could be a friend, you could be a lover, you could be something, but I also want to destroy a part of who you are. It's the concept that you see in toxic relationships, which is like, I love you, now let me change everything about you and it'll be great. And Hamilton is equally ham-fisted in a lot of its depictions of colonialism, but again, Pontecorvo is saying this in 1966. Lin-Manuel Miranda is saying this in the early 2010s. Like, it's the same concepts.
Yeah, it's a lesson that you cannot learn enough. And I think there's a wonderful moment where Ali Lapointe is trying to claim to the absolute leader of the movement, whose actual name I'm forgetting significantly, that he wants to basically walk into a place, guns a-blazing, and just kind of like take out as many French people as possible. And the leader of the Algerians say to him, it's hard enough to start a revolution, harder still to sustain it, and hardest of all to win it. And then he says something along the lines afterwards of, and then when you win it, the work actually begins of rebuilding. And I think that this is, no matter what hardship you want to overcome and revolutionize in your own life or politically or in your own country, I think that that's an incredibly important thing to remember, of just the revolution and trying to change anything at all is actually not the end. And I think that this movie does an incredible job. The sort of tacked on ending where they say like, and Algeria became free in whatever year it happens. And you have all these people dancing in the streets with their flags that they had made themselves. And it's a really, really beautiful triumph scene. Pontecorvo does not shy away from the fact that it's like, and now it begins. Tomorrow we wake up and we start the process of making an Algeria. And I think that's such a wonderful reminder, even only 20 years after World War II ended, most European countries are still trying to rebuild, are still trying to make something of themselves. Germany's already split in half, and that's not going so hot by 1968. They have this it's a wonderful reminder for the people who are still colonial forces that the work is not done and everything needs to continue.
It's definitely a movie that I understand now why it is such a vital piece of cinematic history. Like you said, this isn't something I'm popping in on a Saturday to watch and have fun with, but it's a vital film, especially today, unfortunately. And it's again, beautifully filmed, beautifully realized. I thank you for bringing it into my life.
I'm so happy you enjoyed it, because it is something that if you're not prepared for it, it's going to catch you off guard and it's going to make you have a lot of weird feelings. And like, it's not something you necessarily want to like kick back with a drink and just enjoy Battle of Algiers. But if you get yourself in the right mindset, I think it is honestly one of the few like actual honest to God life-changing movies that I've ever seen.
Exactly. Emily, anything else you want to touch on before we take it home?
The good news is that it's available to stream at many, many platforms. You do not have to pay for it. If you've got a
HBO
subscription,
Max.
to anything. Battle of Algiers is there. And so that's really good. The threshold to entrance is very low for this movie, aside from the emotional threshold that you have to cross.
Exactly. Well, listeners, you can let us know your thoughts on Battle of Algiers, Italian neo-realist cinema, war, I don't know. Actually, maybe don't tell us your comments about war. You can email them to us at ticklishbiz@gmail.com. You could also send them to us via all social media platforms. We are on Twitter/X at ticklish_biz, as well as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at ticklishbiz. Again, you can watch Battle of Algiers on all various streaming platforms, including Max, and I think Criterion. Criterion Channel has it. So that's going to close out this edition of Ticklish Business for today. You can listen to us on all podcast apps, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Reviews matter. We love them. We've gotten 2 in the last couple of months, and I want to read them real quick. This first one comes from SG Elvis Fan, who I believe is one of our patrons, Shawn Goodreau, who says, I've been a classic movie fan for a while, but trying to find good podcasts about classic movies has been difficult. This is one of the exceptions. I love how each host brings their own spin on these movies and aren't afraid to disagree on things, or sometimes have their own ways of thinking swayed in another direction. I feel like you're referencing my ability to try to convince Samantha that Jennifer Jones is a good actress. She's not here to defend that. So I'm just going to say that. The guests are always great. And I love hearing everything about how these movies were made and tidbits about the actors and directors. So glad I found this. And I'm going back through all the old episodes. P.S. Also pick up the book, But Have You Read the Book by Kristen. It's a great read, which I'm on my second time reading it through. Love it. Oh my gosh. Read it more than once? Wow. I would also say read Emily's book. She's written 3. I've only written 1. So
it's the same amount of work.
If you need a palate cleanser, Emily's books, very, very fun. Very nice little 50s throwbacks. We also have another one from Intellectually Curious 76 that says, if you love in-depth discussions about classic movies, this is the place for you. Oh my gosh. It's always great to get reviews. Yay! Review time is always my favorite time. We're on all social media, ticklish_biz on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at ticklishbiz. You can always follow me various places. My official website is KristenKLopez.com. And I also have my Substack where I go long on weird things, including little looks at my disability and film book that I'm trying to get through. You can subscribe to KristenLopez.substack.com. Emily, where are you online? What are you doing?
I am pretty much everywhere at Ms. Emily Edwards. That's MS Emily Edwards. No weird spellings anywhere. I will write up a thing about Elevator to the Gallows, like I promised, in the audio, and I'll put that over on Patreon just because I feel like y'all should read my mind grapes about those things.
Yeah. Definitely do it. Our Patreon, once again, keeps the lights on at Ticklish Biz HQ, gives us chances to do all sorts of new content, like our Don Johnson July, which might actually have been a terrible idea, but we're doing it anyway, as well as all of the great interviews we have coming up. So consider helping us by either becoming a free or paid patron at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. And we have books out. My book is called But Have You Read the Book? Emily has her Viviana Valentine series. You can order them wherever you buy books. We are going to close out International Month on July 31st. Hopefully with something a bit peppier, the candy-coated world of Jacques Demy with the listener's choice of the 1964 film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Till then.